and everything is now coming from a pipeline. It will take about 2 or 3 minutes, and after that it's going to deploy the code onto that particular dev SQL or the dev web app, and then it's going to release, or it's going to add, or it's going to, let's say, go ahead use that particular SQL file and deploy it onto your SQL server out here. So this is what it's going to do end to end. And also right now what it's going to do is that after development is done, it's going to move into something called QA. After QA is done, it's going to move into something called stage. After stage is done, it's going to move into something called production out here as such. So it's now approaching it on an incremental manner, wherein after development is done, going to QA is done, going to, let's say, this one. This is a continuous deployment procedure, wherein you're deploying it on one environment, testing it, then moving to QA, testing it, then moving to stage, testing it, then moving to production, and so on and so forth. And again, if you observe, variables play a very, very, very important role in Azure DevOps. It's all a game of variables out here. Azure DevOps is entirely a game of variables out here as such. Yes, any questions till here? Anyone? Any questions? Sorry, any questions I can take till here? Again, it's created the infrastructure. It's moved into the next task. And the reason I was able to clone my stages is because I never hard coded anything. I never declared my value. If I did that, if I just went here, instead of using variables, if I would have directly given the name here, each and every time I clone, I'll have to come here, change all the names. If it's 3 tasks, it's okay. What if it's 30? What if it's 60 tasks out here? It's going to be really very difficult for you to go ahead into each and every task, change the variables. Firstly, it is very time consuming process. Secondly, there is a lot of room for error. You can make a lot of errors while making changes to all these variables, because of which we suggest going ahead and declaring all the variables on the pipeline out here as such. Yes, anyone, any questions still here that I can take? So now it's doing the SQL task. It should take a minute. Again, if you're using a self-hosted agent, this requires a SQL exe package. So you'll have to install your SSMS on your server. And also, please install the Azure AZ modules out here. All the AZ modules. One module that I'm really looking at is a SQL Server module. So once you install that SQL Server module here, right, you should also go ahead. You should be also going ahead and, let's say, using this particular task out here. So now it's going ahead. It's done for everything. It's now moving into QA. Again, it'll take the same time for QA, deploy it out, create your resource groups, create the infrastructure, and etc. Move into stage, create everything, move into prod. Again in QA, let's come here and let's look at the initialize job. This is what I want to, let's say, really look at. And let's see. Let's say RG name. Again, the task is not finished yet, so it's taking some time to, let's say, go ahead and resolve everything out. Yes, let's look at this one right now. What is it now coming as? QA RG. Let's say web app name. QA web app. Let's say something like plan name or plan. It's coming as QA plan out here. So when it is deploying for a stage called, or when it's deploying for an environment called QA, it's taking the values that are scoped for the environment plus the values that are scoped for the release. See, the values that are scoped for a release are common across each and every stage. For example, app service plan name now is environment, but now the only thing that got changed is the environment value. That's the reason your entire value is now changing, and it's coming as QA plan 01 out here as such. Is any questions that I can take till here? Anyone, any questions that I can take till here? In a real time, do we deploy at a time? Not really. Firstly, we go with development. We deploy everything in development. We wait for the developers to go ahead and test it out. We allow them to completely test it out here, and then we move to the other phases. So in between, what do we do? Is just like the branching policy needs an approval, even the release needs an approval. For example, for development, if I want to deploy a release in development, I will have to take the approval from that particular environment leader. For example, let's say the development team is taken care by a development manager. Let's say he's a technical architect or something like that. What you can do in Azure DevOps is that come here, you have something called pre-deployment conditions. You can go here, just scroll down. There's something called pre-deployment approvals. I can now give the name of the developer here who needs to approve this. I'll say, okay, fine, this is good. Same applies for QA. There is a QA lead. The QA lead will come here and say, okay, fine. Let me put here as a pre-deployment approver. Since in my case, I'm the only person here. I'm adding my name out here every time. And for stage, it is your business team that comes into picture, or it is your operations team that comes into picture. And they'll say, okay, fine, it is class as Azure DevOps here. And in prod, your client comes into picture, or the DevOps comes into picture out here. I can add multiple pre-deployment approvers in my pipeline. So what is now going to happen is that when your code is going to development, it'll first say, okay, fine, I'm waiting for the approval. Once your QA or once the development lead goes ahead and gives the approval, development will be done. Once the development will be done, the QA lead will wait for the development team to go ahead and give them a report telling that how the code is. Is the code good? Do we find any bugs? Are we good to go ahead and take this code? Once the QA lead tells that, okay, fine, the code is good, then the QA lead will come here and give the approval. So if I create the release out here, let's say added approvers. So if I go ahead, look at this, I'll just stop this release for now. Okay, I'll just stop this release for now. So I'll just cancel this out. And let me create a new release. And as and when I create a new release right now, it's pending for approval. The developer or the development lead should come here, say approval, give the comments on why is he approving this out. And once this is done, it will go to QA. It will also wait for the approval here. So if I deploy this out, it's going to wait for the approval for the QA. And the QA here, the lead of the QA team, will wait for a report from the development team telling that, okay, fine, did you test everything? He'll go and check with the developer telling that, okay, fine, did you test everything? Are you satisfied? If yes, give the code to me. I will now run my own test cases, see how the code is actually behaving. So now I'm using the same platform to build, the same platform to release, and it's also deployed on the same platform, which is Windows. I'm maintaining the configuration of my code. Now, whatever tests the developer is doing, the QA will also be doing on the same web app with the same configuration. So both of them are, let's say, at the end of the day, conducting the same test case on the same environment out here, which means that if something fails, it will fail because of the code. So they can isolate it out and let's say go ahead with the software development out here. Yes, any more questions here, guys? Anyone, any more questions here? Yes. If the code fails, if you have any issues, go back to your develop branch, take a feature branch out here, fix the code, merge the code, go through the sonar, build the code, come here, redeploy it back again. So anywhere the code fails, you'll have to again repeat the entire process. That's the reason we develop it in the form of a sprint. We know how a sprint or how much time a sprint actually takes. And when I say a sprint is about 2 to 3 weeks, I won't take the entire 2 to 3 weeks for development. There will be a development and there will be a stabilization phase also. So I'll say 2 weeks I'll develop it, I'll test it along with my tester. And before I go to stage, I'll make sure my code is stable, then deploy it to stage, then move it to production. So in this case, right, you will avoid issues going into the production environment. You don't want to give a faulty code to your client. That's the reason we thoroughly check it in the earlier stages like development and QA, test it out end to end, and then go ahead and do the deployment. Yes, anyone, any questions that I can take till you? Let's see. I have a question. Can I say inbuilt scripting? Okay, can I say it is inbuilt scripting of DevOps? I am not too sure when you say what is the inbuilt scripting of DevOps. Can you please elaborate on that a little bit so that I can help you explain it better? I'm sorry. Stage environment. Stage environment is now taken care by your operations team. So you have the operations team out here. When you deploy the code into stage, operations will take their own test cases. We call it as business test cases out here. So we call it business test case, business acceptance test, and all these things. They'll have their own test cases. They'll run those test cases out here in the same code, the same infrastructure, and they'll now say, okay, fine, this is ready for production. So your operations team has to tell or has to mark the code telling that this is ready for production. Only once they say, will your client accept the code out here? The client will come at the end and say, okay, fine, I'll take the code into production out there as such. And the code into production is moved at the end of a sprint. It's not in the middle of a sprint, it's the end of a sprint, because when your code is deployed, right, if you are not deploying it into a deployment slot, you need some downtime, telling it, okay, fine, I need to take some downtime and etc. But if you're deploying it in a deployment slot, it's good enough, not a problem. You can swap it later. But usually, if we go ahead and deploy this out, you need to take some time from the client, telling it, okay, fine, I need some time from you, and this is the day where I'm going to deploy this out. Usually, code deployment on a production environment happens on a non-business hour, like a Saturday or a Sunday, wherein your platform has less amount of traffic. Let's say if you're a shopping website or something like that, then even a Saturday and Sunday traffic is very high. So you go ahead, implement deployment slots, deploy the code into deployment slots, test it out, swap it out, so that you will avoid, let's say the downtime out there as such. Yes. Anyone? Any more questions here? Okay, let me take that question. Okay, we are using variable, right? So that's why okay, those are inbuilt commands. No, variables are not commands. Variables are variables. This is nothing but value, let's say replacement. So variables are not commands out here. Variables is something that you declare and you use it in your scripts. In my case, let's say in the ARM template, I'm making use of all the variables out here as such. Yes, any more questions here, guys? uh, Create the environments, maintain the environments. In case your environment is down, you'll need to implement monitoring. You'll need to understand why it's going down, how to get it up, and all that stuff. So completely on CI/CD. That's the reason I was telling, as a DevOps engineer, 70 to 80% of my work will be on CI/CD out here. Again, in my CI/CD, if I say CI/CD again, I will have to write ARM templates for it. I will have to write PowerShell. I will have to write Terraform according to the need out here. And also I need to implement all those things out here. Also the security of my organization, like in later classes we'll see what is a key vault and all these things out. You'll have to get in the security component out here. And once we deal with something known as a security, we also deal with environment maintenance. So as a DevOps, I need to do boards, I need to do repos, I need to do CI, I need to do CD. I'll also need to monitor my application. So I need a good knowledge on the Azure platform also. So that's the reason when you go for a DevOps exam, they tell you that you have to first be an administrator to be a DevOps engineer. The reason it is this one. Yes. Any more questions here? Anyone? Any more questions out here? Okay. So let's say one thing. What you did is that there are about 5 or 6 environments that you have. Each and every environment has like about 30 or 40 different tasks, which needs around 60 or 70 variables. So what you did is that you acted smart and you went ahead, you put all these variables out here. You use it in a very generic way. You said, okay, fine, these are all generic variables. So you don't have to declare so many variables again and again. Only thing that you're declaring again and again is the environment. And rest of the variables are based upon the environment out here. Good. So your client is very impressed by this. The client is telling, okay, fine, I want to create a new pipeline, a new release pipeline. So you say, okay, fine, I'll go and create a new pipeline. Client is telling all the variables that you used in the first pipeline, right? I now want all these variables for the second pipeline also. Of course, with a different value or slightly with slight changes out here. But for some reason, I want all these values in the second pipeline also. What do I need to do right now? Can I export all these things? Can I copy all these things at one go from here and paste them? Not really. It's not working out. Which means that if I want to replicate the same variables out here as well, let come here, copy this, paste this here. Let come here, copy this, paste this here. Come here, copy this, paste this here, and so on and so forth. Again, I'm telling there are multiple variables right now. There are not just one. There are not, let's say, just one variable out here. There are multiple variables. So you take time from your client, telling that, you know what, I need good amount of time to do this. You copy all these things. The client comes the next day and says, okay, fine, I need a third pipeline with all those variables right now. So the point here is that it's very difficult for me to go ahead and reuse variables in multiple pipelines. If condition here is if you created something called as a pipeline variable. All these are pipeline variables. Pipeline variables are only and only valid for a particular pipeline. You cannot reuse them for a different pipeline called pipeline 2. Reusability is 0 for a pipeline variable. That's the reason you have another concept called what? Variable groups. These are also called as global variables or also called as library values. Libraries, which means that what you can do is in Azure Devops, you can create something called as libraries or variable groups or global variables. Let's go there. So right now I do not have a library. I'll say add a variable group or a library. I'll say it is a development. Again, I can put something known as a generic variable group out here, a very generic one, or you can put something called development or something like this. And I can say env environment is dev. I'll say ASP name, app service name is dollar env plan 01. Is something that I have to do at least for once. I will say web app name, and whatever was my web app name, I'll just copy that out. It's in my library and SQL Server name. So I'll at least have to do this one. So that's the reason we get started with a variable group itself. We try to, let's say, avoid pipeline variables or we try to go with the minimum, let's say, pipeline variables as possible. And finally, I'll say username, password, and all these things. So I can copy all these things out here. So I have password, I have location, I have SKU. I have something called SKU name. These are all the variables that I can actually think of, and also I have something called RG name. So here, username, I'll say it is test user. Password, I'll say it is something like Microsoft 001. And password type is a secret. I can log this out. Location, I can say it is East US2. SKU name, I can say this is F1. RG name, I can say this is env-rg. Same thing what I'm declaring on my, let's say, pipeline variables. I'm declaring the same thing in my variable group. I'll say save. Now I want the same set of variables for QA. I'll say clone. I'll change the name here to QA. Just come down. I'll need to retype my password here. The only thing that I'll change here, QA. Probably I want this is S1 and I can save this out. What is the advantage of this is this. Now, instead of using these variables out here, instead of using the pipeline variable, I can go here into variable groups. I can say link a variable group. I can say development for a stage called development. I'll say link. Now, when your client comes back and says, you know what, I need a similar pipeline, I can go to a different pipeline right now. And when you're adding a new pipeline here, and now your client is telling, you know what, I have a development stage. I need the same values that you had for the first pipeline. So you say, okay, fine, don't give me the entire day. Give me just 2 minutes. Go to libraries, variable groups, link this to a different stage out here. You can reuse your variable groups. Pipeline variables cannot be reused. Variable groups can be reused out here. That's the biggest difference between what you have in a pipeline variable versus a variable group. Variable groups are better strategy than to go for. I mean, variable groups are better in the terms rather than going for something called as a pipeline variable out here as such. Is any questions till you that I can take? Anyone? Any questions I can take till you? Anyone? Anything till you? You can have unlimited options. Databases like MySQL, Cosmos, Cassandra, Mongo. You have a lot of things out there. Unstructured data. No, just for structured data. Unstructured data, storage accounts. Storage accounts is the, let's say, most widely used, let's say, data storage structures out there for unstructured. I'm sorry. Again, when you say the procedure is the same, so you want to inject some unstructured data like images and etc. Then you'll have to, let's say, get your own PowerShell script. There is nothing called direct copy. Again, there is a copy. Again, if I remember right, if I say copy out here, there is an Azure file copy. So it's see, if you see, copies files to Azure blob storage. So if you add this, you can say what is the source, what is the subscription, destination type, Azure blobs or Azure VMs. You can say what is the storage account, container name, and the prefix. I'm sorry, it's not creating a new one. It is, sorry, it's not. No, it's not creating a new storage account. It's uploading the file to an existing storage account. It's not creating something. It's just doing a copy of the file into the existing storage account from repository to storage account. Yes. So if you look at this thing, now we are talking about pipeline variables, and then we are talking about variable groups out here. I'm telling you can declare variables either in a pipeline or in a variable group. So let's look at our variable group. Okay. See, my variable group has a value called SKU name pointing to F1. What if someone goes ahead, takes the same SKU name, adds it on the pipeline, says this is S1. Now you have the same value or you have the same key value declared in a variable group and also in a pipeline variable. And in the variable group, you have the value to as something called S1. In the pipeline variable, you have the value to be something called what? S1 out here. So F1 and F1 and S1 are, or let's say, alternatively declared. In a variable group, you have the F1. In a pipeline variable, you have the S1. My question is, which value will Azure DevOps take? Will it be F1 from the variable group or will it be S1 from the pipeline variable? So now I'm telling, if you have conflicting variables both in your pipeline variable and your variable group, what will Azure DevOps really take? This is the question that I have, and this is what you are going to answer me tomorrow in the tomorrow's class. Practice it today and answer me in the tomorrow's class on what are pipeline variables, what are variable groups. If we have conflicting values, how will Azure DevOps resolve those variables? This is, let's say, the question that I have. Please look at it and let me know, how does Azure DevOps treat this scenario? Yes, anyone, any questions still here? Yes, anyone, any questions that I can take till you? Including code and sorry? Everything is stored in Azure repository. Everything, including code, your data, everything is stored in the repository. You do any operation on your repository, take your repository as the source, and then go for deployments. Yes, so please answer this question on what will happen if you have multiple variables, different values, declared in the same, meaning declared, let's say the same key value pair declared in the variable group and also the pipeline variable. How will Azure DevOps really treat this? Let me know, and we'll talk about this particular answer in the tomorrow session. Right? Any questions, guys, before I close? Anyone? Any questions that I can take before I close? All right. Thank you, and have a good day. Thanks, guys.